Good evening. First of all, John and I wrote this book. We've known each other for about 20 years or so. We started together to post in January of '93, and we didn't know each other at the time. We were both coming to the Post, and both of us were a little skeptical of the other because it's like, what kind of brother want to work for the Washington Post? And so we were that's how we started off with each other. But we became friends, and we've covered politics. We've covered a number of things. I started off, as Terry just said, at the Washington Center for Politics and Journalism. And that semester, I got to work here covering official Washington. People like Ron Brown and others got to go to attend White House events and sort of see what official Washington looks like. And Terry's goal was to sort of have us become political journalists who would not be not one ideology or another, but sort of look to cut through that to say, here's what the Democrats say, here's what Republicans say, and introduce you to all of those folks at the same time. I did some political reporting, but then I gravitated away from it because not a lot of it felt real. Because our political leaders, a lot of times I didn't know whether I was talking it almost didn't matter whether I was talking to Democrats or Republicans because everybody was spinning. It was all about the spin and not about the real people. And on the campaign trails, even when you go out into America, what passed for real journalism was going to a diner. In Iowa, doing Iowa caucuses as opposed to just knocking on doors a lot. And so that's the kind of reporting that John and I have done over the years, and that's the kind of, so that's just sort of where we come from on this. This book was sort of last, 2 years ago, a year or so ago when Barack Obama was elected president, there was a lot of themes that were, hope, change, and a number of other things. One of the things that they were talking about but when we started talking about black people, the discussion was black people think this, and black people was one black people, as Terry talked about with with him representing white people tonight. It was sort of black people think this. Well, this book was meant to turn the camera lens the other way and look at the crowd and to say who are these folks and what do they think, and what we came up with. They think a lot of different things. And so we've talked to union workers, we've talked to ex-offenders, we've talked to people who are business owners who don't want the taxes cut, and so a lot of people who have a lot of different opinions about the world. One of the chapters, the first chapter, the chapter that I'll read from, we both did personal chapters. My personal chapter was about my own family. It was about my family centered around my grandmother, Daisy Mae Francis, and our family moved off the plantation in 1975, and that's not a mistake. That was 1975. I was 7 years old when we moved away from the plantation, and so we talked about that whole that's meant to sort of serve as sort of the connection from slavery to the presidency, and I'll read a little bit from that chapter. For most of Daisy Mae's life, free expression was not an option. On the plantation, everyone understood the rules. White people talked, black people did what they were told. Alice Plantation was named for Alice Calder, the wife of the man who once owned the property and the black slaves who worked in the fields. The main plantation, or big house, is an 1850s Greek revival-style structure with a grand foyer and august columns. At the rear is a sweeping lawn that rose right up to Bayou Teche. Stately oaks dripping with moss, oaks that shaded my grandmother, my mother, and me as we played under them as children. We all hid from the sun under those trees, ran up those steps, and rolled in that dirt, oblivious to all that had gone on before. This is the Deep South, its principal cleavage that between black labor and white wealth. In 1860, St. Mary Parish was home to 13,057 slaves, more than just about any other parish in the state. My grandmother was born there on November 22nd, 1929. There are no records of her birth, but she knows that to be her birthday because a family friend remembered that her own daughter had been born on the same date. When she was 2 months old, my grandmother was given away by her mother, who worked for a white family that was moving to New Orleans and forbade the young woman to take the child along. Daisy Mae ended up with Willis Papa Jones and his wife, Ma Bertha, who died when my grandmother was 5. My birth was a faint memory for my grandmother, but Papa's second wife, Kizai, remained a source of raw contempt more than a half century later. She was no devil, Daisy May said of her stepmother. That old girl was mean. She never had any children of her own. I was just something that if she felt like she wanted to beat on, she did it. Papa didn't know about all of that. I never told him. I don't blame him. He was a good old soul. Papa's house was down the quarters, in a vernacular passed down from slavery, referring to the original slave quarters. The house had 2 rooms, a bedroom and a catch-all room where Daisy May slept on a sofa bed, and the family ate its meals and socialized. They raised a little bit of everything. Mustard greens, turnips, and okra, chickens, hogs, and turkeys, my grandmother said. Most of the time we had meat to go along with rice and gravy. Big families were the norm. School children walked half an hour each way to attend school in Franklin, the closest town. My grandmother wanted to be a nurse, but quit school in the 8th grade to help out on the plantation. At LSC, the sugar grinding mill churned nonstop October through January until it was dismantled in the 1950s. During grinding, every hand was needed to bring in the crop. Slavery might have been outlawed after the Civil War, but life on the plantation moved to the same cyclical rhythms that our ancestors had known. On the plantation, long after slavery had ended, blacks were treated like children, with whites as their wiser guardians. Workers paid no rent or utilities. If they got sick and went to a doctor, the bill was sent to the office manager at the plantation, who took it out of their pay a little at a time. At the company store, the store clerk decided when the unannounced credit limit had been reached. Discrepancies involving pay or store charges went unchallenged, and workers were not expected to know or care about politics. It was not until 1968, 3 years after the Voting Rights Act, that a majority of black citizens participated in a national election. But participating for Daisy May did not necessarily mean free choice. The overseer would say, "There's an election coming up, and this is who you're supposed to vote for," she told me. So fast forward to 1975, and my one of my uncles was drafted to the NFL, and he got a contract, and he ended up playing 9 years. But 2 years after he was drafted, he put a down payment on a house in town, and this is my grandmother's reaction to moving from the farm to town. It was great, she said. It was a joy. The one thing I appreciated about that was that you could have hot water. Before, you had to heat up your water. It was a different way of life. She was no longer isolated on the farm. She still didn't drive, but now she could walk places. One of those places just across the street was Willow Street Elementary, the former Negro school she attended as a child. She was hired as a cook. Her boss was a black woman. I never dreamed of that. So anyway, I'll stop there. And so that's sort of to represent one of the sort of where we came from in this country. That and so why there was euphoria about the election of a black president. And as an aside, my grandmother, who I talk about here, had been battling ovarian cancer for 4 years, and she died last on Wednesday, and we just buried her today, actually. So. But she was the person, the reason this book came about, because she was the reason how we sold this book was with her chapter to the publishers. So.
First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming out, especially with the rain. Last week, Robert and I were in New York, and we had the snow, so we've been thinking about renaming this the Biblical Book Tour, or maybe the Fire Next Time Book Tour, or Locust or whatever. But and let me say, Robert gives you a glimpse of it with the excerpt that he read from. His grandmother really was the inspiration for this book. And this it's the first chapter in the book because it's sort of where we all began. It's where Black America begins. It's where America begins. It's rooted in the South, the Deep South, on this plantation. I mean, one of the things, when I first met Robert, and he's right, we were kind of suspicious of each other because we both worked for the Washington Post, and we didn't trust brothers who worked for the Washington Post. But one of the things that one of the first conversations I remember having was he was telling me that he was born in basically these slave quarters on the bayou in Louisiana. I just couldn't. I was raised in Indianapolis in the Midwest, and I almost couldn't believe that. I didn't think he was lying, but I just couldn't conceptualize being born in slave quarters. But anyway, what you can hear from Robert's reading is that this book is not it really, to be honest, is not particularly preoccupied with Barack Obama. In some ways, it's maybe bad marketing, but we really want to tell the story of us. Who are we? What does it mean to be black in the age of Obama?